and oh yeah, we got to give permission. And so we'll get going on slump busters. And I talked last week as far as just kind of the little bit something different. This one's a fun one to tie. It's easy to tie. I'm going to go through materials and then also the underbody on that, because also with material questions and thanks to hooks and a lot of different stuff. And then it doesn't take very long for this fly. I'm going to switch over my camera on and kind of just run through. This is really, it's a variation on a leech pattern. And one of the tricks on this, as far as the material that you use. So again, looks like a leech. With the materials on here, starts out, looks rather fluffy, proportion and size. The cone head is kind of telltale as far as with this. They started up a hook on here, and we'll go through that too. And then all of a sudden you can get to mega sizes on this, just as far as a lot of weight, a huge hook on here. And so there's a lot of different ways you can use this fly. Here's one I kind of was playing with, like the different colors on the collar. And when I was running through trying some different ones, there are some materials I just don't really like the way it looks, right? It's a little bit too, it's going to be really, really thinned out once it has water. And then you go to a very small on this size too. So it's probably the closest thing to a woolly bugger. Just a few different techniques. It actually is not difficult. I like the shape of it. And there's a few tricks as to just kind of working through the materials and working through, kind of how to work with them. What do you buy? So I'm going to cover some of that. And this is on a larger hook on this one that's on my vise. So I've got that as far as it's a size 4. So you can go large. I'm going to do this for the first one just to kind of show as far as positioning and different things too. Then I've also number 10 with Firehole. I like this. The difference is in your hook, Firehole, it clearly is a smooth, no barb at all. Just as far as with on this, I don't smash on some of these, because if I want a trailer off of that, I do like that little catch to be able to keep my trailer off and keep it in place, where some of the more smooth, give me an example, no barb on here, and it's still different profile, but it works just the same, and really happy with the performance on all of them. Then dug out from the box, and some of you guys are going to recognize, can you see this one? So anyway, you can go large, you can go small on this. The cone or the bead on the top is relative to the size of the hook. So the other thing is that first starting out and trying to figure out what do you buy. So I do like Cyclops, mainly just from the consistency as far as the bead. Now they are painted, so they'll chip if you hit a lot of rocks. And the other part is that figuring out what to buy versus, let me see if I can find one, versus what size hook. And so I'm kind of showing this as well. This is always just a great reference to have. And if it's something that doesn't come in the kit, sometimes they'll give you a little cheat of what size hooks that these fit on. And if you can't get it over the bend, smash down your barb, and usually it'll go over. They are not slotted. They're just straight up with the beads. One's a smaller section, and then they have the larger section for putting in. So I did start with the cone on this one. Mix kind of tungsten, brass, and I mean, again, you can go anything with, I like these because with the rainbow colorant, it tends to pick up a lot of different highlights as it's moving through the water. It just gives that little bit of flash. And so that's a good option. The part that's probably the most frustrating is thinking you have the right size cone for the hook that you have. And a lot of times, again, sliding through, you think it would fit, but then all of a sudden it gets hung up. So again, smash the barb. That's the first option. If it still won't go up a size on your bead. It obviously has to hold and not go over the eye as far as losing it. But other than that, you can almost go any size. It gives a little bit of weight to it, but the material is actually what weights this so much. So you're going to go more either cross stream, or you can start downstream, let it drop. I usually do like a count to 10 to make sure it's a little bit lower. Strip in. You would run this almost like you would maybe a rooster tail on a standard. So you really don't want to break your pace, because what happens is it does get picked up as far as like, what's it doing? But you could almost jig it along the bottom as well. So it has a lot of different fishing techniques on here. And now between that, so there's a lot of different materials that, you know, as we kind of talk through different things. And when you first talk about rabbit strip, so I've got a lot of different ones in here, and I probably should have done something more as far as a display, because as you look at them in the pack and you're kind of going, okay, $5, what am I getting? First off, Ziploc, so you can open the top, and when you pull them out, they just keep on coming out. So if I had the other camera set up, they're long strips of this. And if you start with this and go, well, I only need this much, and you cut it off here, you're going to end up with a lot of little random pieces of it. So like I've said, with the threads or other things, kind of start figuring out how to work around, keep it in your hand so that you're only cutting after you use. This one's a Bard, so I love this. I love the way it sets up, and you can use it for a lot of different things. If you're doing crawdads, if you're doing some other things too, again, the variation with this stamped on color, they didn't come this way. This is something where you'll find that you like the patterns of it and how it displays out. The other part is the thickness of the hide underneath. So this one is a little bit over 1/8 of an inch. And then if I pulled out a Magna, which is huge, let's see on that. And you can see the difference then in a profile. So this is going to be for a much larger. And then here's a comparison in that. And the difference is what you're trying to wrap around the hook shank, and then also how you build it up. So again, on that larger one that I did, that was a 1/0, I think. That was actually a 4. You know, I used the larger size on that, but if I were to use this on a small, I'm just building too much material because you're going to wrap the hide around. So I like the smaller with this. And then they also have micro. And so, you know, of course, just like turbo, anything that's labeled micro, you just kind of go, oh, well, that's cool. And I must have it. And so then when you're talking about micro, you're down to these sizes in this. So it's a strip. And again, kind of a comparison. See if I can get those up. You can see how much smaller one is to the next. I like, as far as the different textures, I'm looking for full all the way through. That definitely plays more to the fly that we're tying versus that little scrawny thin one that I was using, which again, it's still a micro. It just isn't all that great. It has some good chunks to it, but then I also get to some areas where it's really, really thin. And it just isn't going to lay the way I want it to. So go through your materials. The easiest part with knocking out a whole bunch of these at once is prep your area, prep what you're working on, and just kind of have things out, have your wire scissors out. And again, if you don't work from your hand, you're still going to end up with a bunch of small strips like this. Keep these work great in your dubbing mixes as well. So they still have a use. You're just probably not going to be able to tie a fly with it in this capacity.
Amy?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. What's the difference between the rabbit strip and a Zonker?
It's all the same. They sell
Is
them
it?
in the different packaging. Yeah, it's actually so it's just the way they label, because a lot of people know that Zonker, where it runs classic up the
Okay.
front. They just sell them in Zonker strips because it's by name recognition, but they're all going to be processed the same.
Okay. Thank you.
And then the other thing is that they have like, again, micro rabbit strips. You use those on Zonkers. So it's just a matter of when you can see it in here. If you have an opportunity to, and this is kind of funny. So this one is a pine squirrel. Same thing. Again, it's cut into strips, and when you can pull it out, it looks like a really bad wig or something, right? So it's all connected still to the hide. And that's usually the classic of what you're looking for, John, is that it's all strips. There's a lot more you can go into as far as cross cut, or is it, with the grain, basically. That for what we're doing, you don't have to be that specific. You also have a whole lot of stuff left up here on the squirrel, though. That's great.
Yeah.
But it is kind of interesting when you first pull it out and you're like, where do I start? Well, you're going to start at where it's connected up here, as opposed to cutting like a section down here. So you're working all in strips for these, just like you would on a Zonker. And then so I've pretty much, again, got the hook on here. Went through the different materials on, and I'm going to show this. This is just the regular. You can see how fluffy it is. So it has great kind of texture to it. This is where you're going to get the weight. So the cone head on the front is aesthetics of it. It'll help it. But really, once this picks up water, and then that's where it's going to become the weight. The other thing is that I have my little Christmas dish under here, but if you can get out of the habit of licking your fingers, see, look, I even have it. I had to prove that. Don't lick your fingers. Don't lick this material, because some of it that is dyed, you're going to end up with, well, just don't do it. As we talk about, getting back with people too, that kind of weirds out some people. So if you can have a wet sponge to get your fingertips wet, that works really, really well, because I'm going to have to manage all of this in the process. So I've got my thread started on here. I'm using a white thread. I know, let me hear about it already. I'm going to get this in position. I'm going to start, and I'm not going to be too particular about touching wraps to load this in. I'm just going to get started, kind of get one base on, and now I've got my material. So big, kind of clunky. When you hold up your material, it has a north and south to it. And sometimes it's almost hard to tell because you hold it up and again, it's fluff, and which way does it go? Well, generally, wherever you took it from, kind of go down this. And what we're looking for is the pattern to go down. And you can see already just with my hand and the amount of static. See how it's already wanting to grab to me? So I need to eliminate that without adding any oils or without touching a whole lot. So I dip my fingers in, and it controls everything. And I haven't added any chemical, any oil or anything to the material. With the length of this, so underneath, so where my hide is, I'm going to measure that to about the hook shank. And I've got my thread stopped where I want it. So I'm going to come in, kind of measure, eyeball it, whatever you want to do. And now you're going to separate your fabric. And again, just dip your fingertips, and that's generally enough. You don't need to soak this under a faucet. And what I'm going to come in now, because this has such a large profile to it, I'm going to come in. I'm almost pinching that to my hook shank. Come over. I've got a positioning. Again, you just kind of work around getting stuff out of your way on this one. I've got it in about 3 wraps. If again, if it should be good. On this part of it, I'm just going up in front to position my thread. I'm not going in to create a thread jam or anything. I'm just going in, make sure it's all cinched in place. On this, I'm going to pull all of this material back out of the way. And I've used these before too. You can find them at the dollar store. They work great because they secure everything back off of my vise and out of the way. And now we get to a whole ton of different materials as far as the flash and what you want on the underbody. If you were to pause this, all the material kind of comes forward in the water, and that's why you would do a flash. You could also do this as a straight thread wrap, no problem at all. The wire that I'm going to use on here is a medium wire. If you use an ultra, it's going to be a little bit too small for the profile and again the weight of the fly. So I want something that stands out, but mostly I want it to serve a purpose, which we'll get into. And so I'm going to go ahead and just position my wire in. I kind of hold that at my 45. I'm going to run it all the way up the front and come on all the way back to back. This is one of the things that I do like about streamers is it does need to look good. It does need to do its purpose and everything, but it doesn't have to be as meticulous. So this is what I consider kind of an easier fly for newer folks tying. Maybe somebody who has some dexterity issues too, because you just need to get the wire as close as it can to the shank. For the under and the traditional in a zonker, in a, hello, what am I tying? Slump buster. It is going to be a flat braid. And what this is, it's almost like a tubed. It is very flat. And you can use this, it'll incorporate into other flies. So if you're doing minnow muddlers, things like that, this would be your underbody wrap. So you might have it. I do prefer in mine, I don't hardly ever do like a brand, but I do like Beavis. It doesn't unravel as much at the end, so I don't have as much waste. And that's the thing I found. The other thing is that you can also do more of a wrap. So this would be something, this is Axle, and it's more of the corded. The one thing that I would say on this is it does add a little bit of bulk. And when you're trying to tie this in for everything being as close as you can, you're going to want that to splay out a little bit. You would not keep it in the corded fashion as two tight wraps around each other. So it's just a difference. The other part, if you have a bobbin that's on its last leg, maybe you lost the ceramic insert or something, these work great to just load up on your bobbin. And then you can come in, add this in, and then you're on to the next step too. So the one thing that I have found does not work is something on this fine. So this is another Beavis. And again, this is more for an accent, but it's not going to serve the same purpose as the wire does, because the wire I want to do something as we get moving. And this is going to take you forever to wrap all of that. And the other part is our tinsels. What I found with this is I'm not happy with it. I think it does the same. It has some great look to it, but I just haven't been happy with the way it lays down. And you can also go with your straight up tinsel. Why not just leave the hook bare if you're going to go to something like that? So of course I like the colors, but that gives you kind of an idea as to the different products underneath. On your flat braid, on this one, again, if you don't have it on a bobbin, and flat braid will work on a bobbin, you just need a fat one. But on this, I'm just going to cut off a section of it for what I want to wrap. And same thing, just like we would wrap in anything else. I'm going to work to the curve, and I'm going to come in a little bit under my 45, come in and cinch it in and just move forward. And as it gets a little bit closer in, just so it doesn't fray, just going to mash it in there. And on this section now is when you leave your thread back out of the way. So if you have a thread holder and you want to pull it, that's great. You don't have to. It's kind of just your preference on here. Now I've got my flat braid up and over, and you're laying these that they are touching, if not overlapping, by about a quarter. Just go forward, just fill in that base. And then as you come in closer on the end of it, you're locking in. So once underneath, cinch it in, second one underneath, couple in front, and you can cut that to get that out of your way. So now that's out of the way. Now I come back to the rabbit strip. So I've got this in where I want it. And the good thing is things can still be positioned. So if you want it more up square on, now's the time, you know, position it before you start in with the, so this is a bad hair morning on with this guy, right? On here, again, just kind of wet your fingertips. This is where your bodkin comes in handy, because with my wire, I'm going to go through and I'm going to create segments on this. So with your wire, you can come up, you can move it into one wrap, and that's where I'm going to put in the first feed. I like with this medium wire, it stays in place. I don't have to worry about it spooling back or losing its place. So I can actually work as if it's 2 or 3 hands. Your bodkin can help separate this out, almost part it, or just come in and again with a little bit of moisture to it. Come in, I'm going to wrap it around. I've got it positioned, moving this strip back. I'm going to do one wrap, and then where this comes up is where I'm going to put my next segment. So I lay this back down. Again, same thing, come in. And what I was talking about as far as using your bodkin, if it's a little bit more, you could separate it out. At almost every time, if you just need to add a little bit so that it stays a little bit more cooperative, a little bit less unruly, just dip your fingertip and that's enough. And again, you haven't soaked it with water. Same thing. And I pull it up. At this point, I'm going to start in a collar. So I really don't need any more of this wire. I'm going to go ahead, wrap it up behind, come in, cinch that in place. And come in with my wire scissors, nip that into place. Now with this material, a lot like a lot of streamers, and you can see it's going like it wants to have a mind of its own. And I don't want it to at this stage, because what I'm trying to do is get the hide as close as I can to the hook shank. And so you're going to turn this a little bit in that turn, and you can see how it lays right down on there. I'm going to come up and I'm basically candy caning this forward. So I don't come up on the same, I'm just moving it just a slight bit forward, pull it into place, move everything to the back, slide over. And again, as that starts drying out, it's going to start picking up static. So this is really the part where, again, you come in like that and it's a lot easier to have it cooperate. You don't need a brush for any of this. I'm going to come in right behind this cone. And this is the part where you can test your patience. You can go one more and just jam it in. I mean, because you're going right behind that cone and I want a snug fit. I'm going to come up over the top, and I'm still going to use that same separating because I want to really make sure that I'm grabbing the hide of this. I don't want extra hair blocking. I'm going to lock it in that. So I've got, 2 or 3 wraps behind. Again, with anyone new, what I would recommend, get this back out of your way, move to your whip finish at this point, then come in and clean up the fly. If you like with glue or super glue or the Zap-A-Gap, this would be the point where you could add a little bit of this behind. So you could either use your bodkin, get in behind in here with some glue, and then smash it back on. And then that's the point. Then when you're finishing, before that glue's set, come in, whip finish. And before, with a bead or a cone or anything, it's really deceiving because you think, okay, I've got my finish in here. Hold it, make sure you feel that cinch, because you're going to feel it actually move and get in more tight behind that bead. Now cut it off. Now I can come back in and I can release this portion of it, and I can come back in, cut that up clean. I'm going to cut it from the hide, not the hair. And there we go. Now, when I fluff this all back out, again, it looks crazy as far as the first portion of it. If I were fishing this and I had a lot of mishits, I'd probably go back in and adjust the tail. And how you do that is you're actually going to cut from the hide. And what I'll show you is don't snip it off straight like this, because you're cutting all the good stuff off the top. So instead, cut it from the hide section underneath, get right in there, get underneath it all, and come in. And then you've kept the same profile. So you haven't lost any of the good stuff, and it doesn't have that blunt cut, which we talk about on woolly buggers and things like that, that just gives it that little bit of unnatural, right? That might get that pause or the refusal. And as you're looking at this, so again, you have it in your fly box going, should I not? So the other part is that get it wet before you toss it. Get it wet. Does it do what you want it to do? Because the difference of what I just showed you to this, I'd fish this all day long. Because at first, the first one you look and go, I don't know. This, again, going along the bottom, going along kind of mid, yep, it's going to look like something that they want to. Again, changing out your bead heads. So we've done this same one. Looks like it's an egg sucking look, whatever. Again, on the more leech style pattern. So that's what I have in Slump
Amy?
Busters. Yes.
Amy, on the gluing, you mentioned you could put glue on the head cement, or put head cement behind the bead. One of the things I've found, especially with something like this, where you're getting tight to the bead, is if you put your glue on your thread before you do your whip finish, and then let the thread carry the glue down, it works really well.
Absolutely. And I'm not a fan of like some of the different, like this super glue. Yeah, I ruined a pair of pants from that. But I would say, yeah, absolutely control what's happening. You heard me laugh about if anybody's ever had to unpry their vices from using super glue. That's about the last time you used that kind of super glue. Gorilla Glue. I was turned on to this. An okay believer of it. So it does work. It is super glue. It gives you about 10 seconds. Has a nice top on this too. But same thing. So you could go up and down your thread and have actually control on this. And I've been happy with it. So the other, the brush and nozzle one, don't waste your money on it. This one, I guess I'm a believer. I bought 2 bottles of it now. So it is something where it's easy enough. It's controlled by pressure on the inside too, so that you can just hit it and then do your whip finish. Watch where your whip finishing tool is. That's the biggest error I've seen on it, is that people all of a sudden get, and if you work with your whip finisher only an inch away from your hook shank, you're going to end up with glue on your whip finisher. So all of those are good cautions. But
Excuse me,
does anybody have any questions on any of
Amy,
these?
I have a question real quick. So you put the braid on the body, and then you
Right.
turn around and cover it up with the zonker.
So what happens is and you're right, and what it does, and this one might not show as much, but let's say there's a pause in, and so all of a sudden, if you do a like strip pause, what it does is it kind of like fluffs up this material. It gives that little bit of flash. It is something where you could get away with just doing just a thread base underneath. Yeah, you definitely, I think with the wire and with how hard these get hit, do the wire because of the materials, and it'll start fraying on you. But the braid, and here you can see it a little bit more underneath. See how that gives just a little bit? But the color is not necessarily, I don't know. I like to do kind of more of that pearl color underneath, especially if it's a darker fly. just the interest. It's probably more for the fishermen though. It messed up all of his hair though. But anybody else who, I mean,
Thank you.
anybody comments on or questions on, I think that's a great one, because I think a lot of times we do that even on, with adding dubbing in or even chenille, and then you cover it all up. So I think that's a great. Man, you guys, nothing? Anything?
We're just sitting in awe.
All right, well, we'll sit.
How far can
we'll
you
sit-
cut the leather at the tail? How far up can you cut it?
Good length. A lot of it's gonna tell as far as, mostly what I saw is if I was really missing. So if they were coming after it aggressively, but missing a hit and not taking a full, then I'd shorten it up. I'd go an eighth at an inch at a time. But it's really something where I don't like anything that's more than about, I go with a hook shank to start. And that's pretty much how I build them all. And then I might go shorter. But pretty much I would follow a woolly bugger as far as with the style of that. You know, if you have too much marabou hanging off the back and all of a sudden you got a lot of mishits, shorten up that marabou on a woolly bugger, because what they're doing is coming and nipping at it and you want them to take the whole thing. I also, and again, I think with like this one, this gives you a pretty good example as far as the size. So it's a much smaller, this is a 10, and you just don't need a lot of extra length. By the time this tapers out, what it'll do is it'll get skinny behind here, Walt. So it starts trailing out like a tail, like a salamander or something. And it just doesn't give you the taper that you want. Here's another one too. Again, this one, pretty long tail off the back, but because once this gets wet, I want that where it looks like something a fish should eat. So here you go, as far as color wise. And that's the shape I'm going to go for. If you create too long of a tail, you've got it's a mouse. I mean, it's truly a mouse. So you've got that off. Anybody else? Anything? Nothing? You guys are all into the eggnog. Either that or John's passing his bottles over there.
So Amy, you talked earlier today about a dubbing loop.
I did. So, you can do this with a dubbing loop. And again, I think it's kind of, preference on. I'll put this one in. I'm not going to do this with a bead, or cone, but I'll show that as far as process. Back to the white thread. Imagine that. The part with the dubbing loop, it serves its purpose. And because you can get a lot of different non-factory colors, right? You can do a lot of different things. And I've talked about all the different dubbings I have. So I have the kits like this. I have my OCD box like this. And yes, it actually goes from color ranges. But I prefer dubbing 100% more than some others, because I can get that color that I have in mind. So crimson worked really, really well this past weekend. And so crimson, okay, is it this color or I don't know. I mean, everybody's got their different, and if you're trying to get some inside tip, well, what does it have? Black? Does it have green in it? Is this crimson or is that purple? So I'll show you as far as a dubbing loop. I've got the material in. I'm not even going to add in the rabbit strip just so that it has a clear view on that. One of the parts with dubbing is your prep. So you've got some materials prepped out, and I talk about this often, and folks who've been on here for way too long have laugh at me because every time I pick up dubbing, I do the same motion. So I pull it apart, stack it on top, pull it back apart again, stack it. And what I'm trying to do is, besides just blending that color, I'm trying to get rid of maybe some of the natural tendencies, maybe a little matted area. But it also makes it a little bit more cooperative, because what I'm going to try to do is take this big wad and fill it into a loop. So with a dubbing loop, I've got my thread in, and I'm going to pull down a section, and this is just trial and error of what works. A lot of times when we see all these, that a dubbing pack, and you throw this out on the table and everybody's using it, and then you get your stuff back at the end of the day, it's completely empty. That's where I say we're like raccoons, right? We all like shiny stuff. So yay, here's one of my favorite colors to work with, but it's shiny. So this is more of a synthetic on. And even if I add this now to the one that I had that was a little bit more on Hare's Mask and a couple other different, I'm still going to do the same blend, but this is what I was talking about mixing in dubbing. And I want the fibers to work for me. So I've got my thread. I'm going to drop it down more out of my range of what I would normally work with. Normally I'm about 1.5 inches off my hook shank. So I've got this about 3 inches. I'm going to put my finger right here, and I'm going to go straight back up. And then I'm going to move my thread all the way out of the way. I mean, if you have a thread holder, again, you can do that. So now I've got a thread loop, dubbing loop. Different kind of wax materials. I do have a preference, but you can use anything from chapstick all the way through just a regular wax. You have to trust that this is, when you touch the thread, that it's on the thread. If you go back and go, is it on there? Is it in your checking? You're going to have it on your fingers, and that makes it a little bit harder to work with on dubbing. So I've got one finger holding as a place. I'm going to come in. I've just touched it once. There's not a lot of clump to it. And now I've got my dubbing again, and I'm going to kind of stretch this, and I'm going to start filling the chamber in this. And again, as you prep your material, you're going to figure out how far you can stretch this without the fibers coming apart, which is the big thing. It's like taking a wire out of a pipe cleaner. So I'm coming in, I'm going to push that in. And as I do that, I'm going to adjust my fingers a little bit so that loop gets a little bit closer. Now I have a tool called a turbo. It's any dubbing spinner, basically. I obviously didn't clean that one from last time. And what I'm going to do with that is go in between, as far as I'm going to hook it, hooks on both sides, and then I just give it a spin. And so you can see with that dubbing loop, it's given me a color variant that is unlike anything else. And I've corded this up so it's nice and tight. And the only way it did that was just twisting. Come in with your hackle pliers. And this is kind of a key part of that, of having, kind of tools that work well with your hand. I can come in, and I'm going to go right now between the turbo and my hackle pliers, and I'm going to cut that section now with my scissors, move all that away. And now I would just start this, and
Why not just use your rotary vise, Amy, and twist it on?
because I like to do it this way, John.
Okay.
I'm only saying that because is Bob Betts on here? Because he's going to tell me I'm putting my dubbing on back. You could, but because you're on camera, so you could. Oh, there you go. So don't let go of it that way. Absolutely, you could. I tend to, even though I have the rotary in here. See, there we go. If I don't knock you guys too many.
Yeah, I'm like you. Even though I've got a rotary vise, I think I use it as a rotary maybe twice in its lifetime.
I use it as a rotary to take a look at the underside of my fly. I really don't. So this part of it is, it's in place. It's where I want it. I'm also not in a hurry to tie flies. So I understand that a lot of people do that. As far as like hackle and things like that, never. I mean, I want to make sure that I'm looking at it all the way through. But after I'm done, And after, when I'm making sure that everything has the lie that I want, then I'll undo it. But they definitely serve their purpose. I don't think I need one. So here you go, as far as like the dubbing loop. And what happened is we just put in about 5 times more dubbing than what we would normally do on a little spin with your finger. If you're trying to add in this much dubbing with your finger on this large of a fly, you'd be going all day because you're going to only be able to go a little bit at a time, wrap a little bit at a time. It's hard to keep that and maintain it where it's a tight cord to your thread with this large of a fly. And then you could add in wings or do anything you wanted to at this point. Add a collar if you wanted. Ta-da. And then you have your under. Anybody else have any questions?
So you could use that in lieu of the stuff you put on as the underbody and just now put your collar over the top of it.
Absolutely. And so what you do is tie in on the rabbit. So tie it in back here, get this all back out of your way.
Yeah.
So that you can work cleanly, put in your dubbing loops for whichever color you want. It gives a little bit more buggy underneath.
Yeah.
Too, but I like that flash in the material. Then come in because you've tied in your wire as well. So that's anchored back here. Come in, and the wire is important. First off, you could go up like a zonker. So you could go from back here all the way to up here and then spin it. What you're going to end up seeing is that your material wants to go that direction as well. So the wire actually keeps that placement on the perpendicular as opposed to trying to wrap it. I found that it gives it a little bit more anchor and kind of separates out those materials too.
Cool.
Yep, absolutely. And same thing. So you have a little material and you're just messing around. Again, what we just used, it has a north and a south. So you always look for where the material is coming off of the bottom of the hide. And the other direction, it will, but it's kind of going against the grain. And you'll know immediately. Just pick up your strip, get it all going the same way. And on this, I can come in right now, add a little bit of it on that top. So I'm going to separate it back out.
And now, particularly on smaller hooks, have you ever found a need to try and actually thin the rabbit strip, not make it narrower, but thin it so that it'll actually wrap a little bit better on some of your smaller diameter hooks? Or if you're making these kind of flies, whether they're, changing the hook gap, you still want to stay with like an extra strong or something like that to where it can handle wrapping that thicker hide around it.
I would definitely go with a streamer style hook. Mainly, I don't think that, first off, you're going to find that when it's all completely wet, that it does not impede on your gap. So it doesn't catch up in this, and that's not from the missed hits. But on something like this, first off, you don't want to thin it this direction. On this part of it, there's some that's just scrawny as far as just the material wise. You'll hit sections even on a strip that are
Amy, what I was talking about was actually thinning the leather portion of it. So the opposite side of the hair, not making it narrower, but thinner so that it would wrap around the shank a little bit easier, be a little more flexible.
A little bit, but I would probably just buy on the micro side as far as they actually make them where they've already done all that on the leather. So they've made this a little bit more narrow. It's still, the hide is still just as thick on top as far as that part of it. So you're not, I did try to peel off one and I think it would work, Roger. I think you would probably definitely want to soak that before, like this way, like what I'm trying to do here, as far as peel that, you could. I think that just with a little bit of moisture, you could definitely get it to separate off of there and make that part more thin as well.
Yeah, I'm sure there's at least 6 ways you could cause bleeding trying to do it. Yes.
Pine
Oh,
squirrel's a little easier to do what she's
Yep.
doing too. It's easier to work with than the rabbit strips, but they also make crosscut
Mhm.
rabbit strips that are actually better for wrapping the shank for like a collar and stuff. So it's just the way they've actually cut it in strips. Actually
Yeah.
helps lay it.
And it does, and so this one's a pine, and so this is the micro pine, and you can see just this one being rabbit, and this one all of a sudden there's almost as if there's nothing. I mean, their hide's so much more thin. It's not even near 1/8 of an inch. So that again works really, really well when you're moving down to smaller sizes, and it still has that same the bushiness, and so it'll still pick up as far as the shape that you want.
Amy,
Yes.
what size leader would you use on this? I mean, how heavy of a,
I fish all of these with my 5 weight and 5X leader. So I mean, I don't change up as much as far as, you know, I've gone back and forth as far as sinking line, not sinking line. But the leader is what's significantly shorter than if I'm trying to fish a dry fly. So my leader on this might only be 5 or 6 feet, or a leader on a dry fly might be the 9 feet. But 5 weight and 5X, and because you're moving it along too, and this is again, it's going to be something we want to get a little bit lower. You're not going to fish it on the top.
Hey, Amy.
Yep.
Let me introduce Mike Kelly. He just joined us. Mike is our premier fly tyer here in the Omaha group. In fact, he'll be tying a couple of flies for us this Thursday on our tying episode. So
Glad
welcome
to have you,
everybody to Mike.
Hello, Mike.
Hello, Mike.
Hello.
Hey, Mike.
Hello.
Hi, Mike.
I'm in the middle of doing some stuff, so I was just watching watching the video and listening in.
Well, thanks for joining us. And yeah, I was just kind of, we went from the slump busters then to dubbing loops to now I'm just messing around with the dubbing loop, and I don't want to cut it off, and so I'm just messing around with this right now. But any words of wisdom for us?
When what I've started doing on some streamers is I'll take a Zonker strip. Sometimes the cross cut ones are a little bit, I think what you were talking about with a thinner strip of hide, but it also has less hair. And
Yep.
so I'll take make a dubbing loop and then take a section of that and stick it into the dubbing loop, but adjust the hair to where it's not as long. You know, you can do it different lengths by carefully pushing the hair in and out of that dubbing loop before you twist it. Sometimes you can end up with a mess and have to start all over again. But if you're actually wrapping the hide, rabbit hair is almost as thick as leather.
Yeah.
A lot of times it can absorb a lot of water, get real heavy, and it can get real bulky.
Yep.
So that's why I started doing dubbing loops with Zonker strips, where I just use it, cut it off the hide, and then twist it up in the dubbing loop. Use a lot less
Wow.
bulk.
You clip it in like not a paper clip, those long clips before you cut it off the hide so that it keeps it nice and straight to slide into your loop.
Yeah, I don't have the fancy Petitjean clips and all that kind of stuff, but I just use it. I think it's like for it's not a big bowl clip like for paper, but I think I've seen them used for like chip bags and stuff like that. But it's a flat
Yeah.
jaws, so it closes real flat and it'll hold that hair in place without slipping out of there.
You cut it
That's
loose,
usually what I've been using.
cut it loose from the hide before you try and put it into
Yep.
that.
But leave a quarter to a half inch sticking out, so you can grab it in between the two threads of your dubbing loop and then hold that thread real tight, and then you can adjust it a little bit by tapping on the ends to make it longer or shorter.
You
That makes it
put
a lot less
anything-
bulk.
So I'm kind of doing this along with you talking, Mike. So I've got it in my
Right.
dubbing loop. Do you put any wax or anything on your thread?
I don't,
do this?
but you certainly could to hold it in there a little better, but you wouldn't be able to adjust it much if you had the wax in there. But if you're doing it like that, you got to be careful with that and use a long scissors and cut that out of there. Like I said, I clip it. Did you lose it?
Nope.
Then when you spin that up, that has a lot less bulk than if you left the hair in there. So then what you have to play with is the length of the hair that you want.
Okay. Yeah, because it definitely has a taper to it, just from what I was doing with this. And so I'm much more full at the end of it, and no rhyme or reason as to how I laid it in there. But then it gets much more thin down this, but it has a great buggy look to it.
Yeah, and then once you adjust it, sometimes you have to clip it off a little bit more because you don't want the butt ends to be sticking out too much, or you'll really have sometimes you want it to be thicker, but it'll get real dense in around the hair if you leave those butt ends in there. So sometimes it's best to
Okay.
cut those at about less than 1/4 inch if you can. But then stroke that back like you're wrapping a hackle, and that'd be a real nice body.
Oh, my thread just popped. Hang on. Okay. Ooh, very buggy.
And then if that's getting too thick, because that's so thick, you wouldn't have to go touching turns. You could space them apart a little bit.
Okay.
When it gets wet, that's going to all fill in. You could do that with a lot of different fur other than rabbit fur.
I figured out what I can do with all these little scraps that I have left after.
There you
All right.
go. Waste not, want
Wow.
not.
I know. I like the shape of that, and it laid down exactly in the taper. I like that. Cool. New tricks of the trade here. Anybody have any other comments? I'm apparently up for everything. If you just want to throw it out here, I'll just start tying it.
Well, join us Thursday so you can see some more tricks of the trade.
I will. Yeah, I've got that link pulled up on that's neat. That's a neat trick, Mike. And I think it's a great, because all of a sudden I've got all these little scraps, and that's what I was saying, is save it for your dubbing as well. Just because it has some great, normally we don't like under fur in anything. We don't like it in the deer hair and moose and elk and everything else. On this one, it definitely plays to keeping that bulk in place. So very cool. And then there's some that are just really thin, that no matter what you do, they're just really thin.
What I really like
Anybody
is
else?
the pine squirrel. It's beautiful hair. It's got a lot of little bars on it. That you can also make a hackle, basically using pine squirrel and trying to get that under fur out of it, and just using the guard hairs. That really makes just a beautiful hackle.
Yeah, and
Soft hackle.
and I like the pine squirrel, and this actually worked great. Here's a real itty bitty guy that I did with the pine squirrel. And it picks up because it has like a brown to it, the olive, it almost goes all the way almost to a black. It's really great, just from the color of it too. And I didn't think this one at all, because again, the hide is so much smaller, that you're not having to fight so much on the bulk. But very cool.
Right.
Anybody else have any slump buster variation questions? anything at all. I will tell you that you can also find this in chinchilla, just because that's a fun one to say. And what I'll say is that the same thing comes in the same strips, and we were talking about the difference. Now all of a sudden you've just really gone up. The hide is much more thick. It almost has kind of a spongy. It just has a different feel to it, but I love it because again of the different variations, and it has a ton of hair to a strip. So there's a lot of different things, but you can't really go wrong. Look at what's in the pack and also look at the size, because if you're tying on a smaller size, you want to probably start with the micros. Don't go to the magnas, which is one of the first ones I showed. And unless you're doing the big less streamers or something. But the magna is about 1/4 of an inch, just as far as the length across. So you've got a lot to work with. You're covering a lot of distance on this, but great quality hair. Again, that green going into black, love it. As far as the color, that was that big monster one that I had.
I mean, I've tied some patterns too to look a little more fishy by adding a feather to either side of it, like a cheek feather to simulate the sides of a fish a bit more, depending upon the colors you select.
So on these, absolutely. And you can do a lot of different things as far as with some flash in and some other parts of it. The other thing is this actually plays to the favor of a sculpin. And so when we're talking about beads and different heads on here too. So a sculpin pattern, there you go with a picture of it. And you can see how this plays to it. Yeah, having some fins kind of, or some gills kind of coming off the side of that too. Definitely gives you, again, some different options to work with, but it's all, it's practice and see what you like as far as the different patterns on there. But these are kind of cool. These go on basically after the fact. You would slide that over, and then again, you're going to have some adhesive to hold that in place, but they are pretty cool to work with. So it gives you just a different than the cone head. But yeah, I like those with the different, again, that's the fun part as I was getting all these ready. So I have, I have 13 that I tied up. So just play with it, but it is one just to have it in, especially if you lose your last, I don't know, mohair leech or woolly bugger, pull one of these out and see what you think. Might be the slump buster. Well, that's all I have on, I figured out why my hackle kept breaking. I'm missing the rubber tip. So it was going straight to, you see how it was going straight to the metal. That's why it kept breaking off my hackle loop. Gotta find another use for those now. Anything? Any questions? Man. All right. Well, so next week is our post-Christmas coma. Anything anybody wants to see from fly tying? What haven't we done for a while? Anything anybody's wanting to see?
How about everybody does their a favorite little trick or shortcut for?
That sounds great. And because we'll probably have some Christmas presents people will maybe get too, that people want to show the new tool. I'm just saying, Santa knows where I live. Yeah, why don't we do that one? And if
What about
we've got,
fishing?
how about what?
It's late December. It's ice fishing.
Walt, I want to see you using your 9'5" weight, cast that fly into that 6-inch hole. I want to see videos of that.
Okay. You got
Okay.
it. You got it.
Sounds like a challenge now. Yeah, except we don't have ice yet. We have a lot of open water. We have a lot of flooded water, by the way. Thank you, Nebraska, for sending that our direction.
Our pleasure.
Yeah,
Hey,
no.
Amy, I got
Yes.
a piece of equipment Linda got for me. it's from Home Shopping Network. And it fits on your head and or your neck. And it's a light.
How cool is that?
So,
Have you tried it yet?
yes. So if you
You're
want to
blind in
tie,
it.
I know. So if you want to tie flies, I'm gonna turn the lights off. Shit. There, okay. So it fits on your head and it goes right into the vise where you want to look at. Or it can fit on your neck, you know. But basically, I use it up here.
Very cool.
And it's from QVC. They're called Anywhere, Sensa 2. The number for it, if anybody's interested, it's QVC. The number is Victor 39406 is the number of the item. And
Very good.
They're adjust up and down, whatever you need to do.
Perfect for finding hooks and beads that are on the floor somewhere.
There you go. It's amazing how many of us will be sitting there later this week going, you know, I could use one of those. We'll be calling you, Walt, if we need the number again.
Use in
Okay.
All right,
conjunction with a
everybody.
very large
Well-
magnifying glass.
I'm sorry?
Used in conjunction with a very large magnifying glass.
Well, I have a magnifying glass that fit on my spectacles. So I really don't need anything anymore. Okay, that's it.
Does it come with a strobe, Walt?
I'm sorry?
Does it have a strobe function to that light? That'd be kind of cool to walk around.
No, I don't think so.
Zombieland.
Oh, man.
Right.
All right, everybody. Well, since this is our last one before Christmas, everybody have a safe, happy, Merry Christmas. And we'll be talking before the new year, see if anybody has any New Year's resolutions about fly tying or fishing. And but other than that, everybody, thank you all. It's been a great year and glad everybody else have on tonight. So be careful, be safe, and enjoy your holidays.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry
Yeah,
Christmas.
Merry
Jingle
Christmas.
bells to everybody.
Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye. Merry Christmas.